I am Dr. Rebecca Sloan, a urologist specializing in male reproductive endocrinology and vascular mechanics. Over the last few weeks, my clinical inbox has been flooded with questions regarding a viral internet trend claiming that swallowing a single spoonful of honey the moment you wake up will magically restore your morning erections within 15 minutes. Millions of men are currently buying cheap, commercial honey from their local supermarkets, eating it on an empty stomach, and staring at the clock, waiting for a profound biological reaction that never arrives. Most of them experience nothing beyond a rapid blood sugar spike followed by a lethargic crash. However, as a physician who relies strictly on evidence-based medicine, I have to clarify something highly controversial. Beneath the clickbait exaggeration and the terrible execution of this internet trick, there is actually a robust, highly specific endocrinological truth that if you utilize the exact right botanical compound and understand the precise hormonal cascade occurring in your body the moment you open your eyes, this targeted carbohydrate intervention fundamentally alters your localized vascular pressure. If you are waking up every single morning feeling physically flat, devoid of energy, and completely missing the spontaneous vitality you experienced in your 30s, you need to understand exactly what is happening inside your blood vessels before you even step out of bed. I consult with thousands of men who sit in my clinic feeling entirely broken, convinced their bodies have simply expired due to age, completely unaware of the invisible chemical straitjacket that is actively shutting down their pelvic circulation. I am going to explain the exact mechanics of this morning biological phenomenon right now. And by the end of this video, you will understand your own endocrine system better than the vast majority of general practitioners. To comprehend why a specific morning protocol can rapidly influence your erectile tissue, you must first understand the intense biological shock your body undergoes every time you wake up. The transition from deep sleep to conscious wakefulness is not a gentle process. It is triggered by a massive, aggressive surge of a stress hormone called cortisol. This biological mechanism is clinically known as the cortisol awakening response. From an evolutionary standpoint, this sudden flood of cortisol is absolutely necessary. It raises your blood pressure, mobilizes stored glucose for immediate energy, and forces your brain into a state of alertness. However, cortisol is an incredibly potent vasoconstrictor. Its primary function is to contract the smooth muscle in your blood vessels, to push blood toward your heart and major muscle groups, preparing you for physical action. In a healthy 25-year-old man, this massive cortisol spike is perfectly counterbalanced by a simultaneous, overwhelming morning surge of testosterone and nitric oxide. These vasodilating molecules fight back against the cortisol, keeping the pelvic arteries wide open and resulting in a rigid, spontaneous morning erection. The clinical crisis that occurs as you cross the age of 50 is a matter of hormonal imbalance. Your natural production of testosterone and nitric oxide steadily declines, but your cortisol awakening response remains just as aggressive. Without the necessary vasodilators to defend the tissue, the morning cortisol surge completely dominates your vascular system. It clamps down on the microscopic arteries, feeding the corpora cavernosa in your pelvic floor, starving the spongy tissue of blood and making a morning erection biologically impossible. This is exactly where the physiological mechanics of raw honey come into play, provided you understand the specific biochemistry. Consuming pure white sugar or processed commercial honey will simply trigger a chaotic insulin spike and exacerbate the stress on your vascular endothelium. However, authentic, raw, unpasteurized dark honey, such as buckwheat or manuka, is a highly complex botanical matrix. It contains concentrated levels of nitric oxide metabolites and a highly specific bioflavonoid called chrysin. When you consume a single spoonful of this specific raw honey immediately upon waking, the natural fructose and glucose enter your bloodstream at a controlled rate, triggering a measured release of insulin. In a functioning vascular system, insulin is a powerful, localized vasodilator. More importantly, a targeted insulin release immediately suppresses the production of cortisol. By introducing this specific carbohydrate matrix, the precise moment your eyes open, you are actively blunting the peak of the cortisol awakening response. You are chemically removing the vasoconstrictive straitjacket from your pelvic arteries. Simultaneously, the chrysin and nitric oxide precursors in the raw honey flood the localized tissue, signaling the smooth muscle to relax. This rapid hormonal shift from a state of intense stress constriction to a state of vascular relaxation is exactly what allows the blood to rush back into the pelvic floor. The execution of this clinical protocol is highly specific and leaves no room for error. First, you must completely avoid pasteurized supermarket honey, which has been boiled and stripped of all its enzymatic properties and bioflavonoids. You must source raw, dark, unfiltered honey. Second, the timing is biologically critical. You must consume the honey within the first 10 to 15 minutes of waking up. If you wait an hour, the cortisol surge has already saturated your cellular receptors. The arteries are fully constricted, and the biological window is entirely closed. Third, you must pair this targeted carbohydrate with an electrical conductor. I advise my patients to dissolve the single tablespoon of raw honey into 4 ounces of warm water, along with a small pinch of high-quality, unrefined Celtic sea salt. The specific sodium and trace minerals in the salt act as a cellular transport mechanism. They shuttle the glucose directly into the cells without requiring a massive, damaging spike in insulin, while simultaneously expanding your blood plasma volume. This rapid hydration instantly increases the localized blood pressure required to engorge the corpora cavernosa. It is a precise, calculated manipulation of your morning biochemistry. Before we move into the deeper biological intervention required for men who have sustained long-term hormonal damage, I want to take a brief moment to ask for your support. If you are finding this level of evidence-based medical endocrinology valuable, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and like this video. This specific type of clinical education fundamentally belongs in the doctor's office, yet standard medical consultations simply do not afford the time to explain it. By engaging with this content, you directly help the algorithm push this critical vascular information to other men who are currently sitting in silence, believing their physical decline is inevitable. For years, my clinical philosophy was deeply rooted in the belief that the body could entirely heal itself through dietary interventions alone. I refused to endorse or recommend any form of concentrated supplementation to my patients. I genuinely believed that if a man simply dialed in his morning routines, managed his cortisol awakening response with targeted raw honey, and optimized his sleep, his vitality would naturally return. I viewed the entire supplement industry with immense skepticism. However, as a physician, you cannot ignore the reality of patient outcomes. I began to observe a highly distinct and frustrating pattern in my clinic. The raw honey and sodium protocol produced excellent results for many men, but there was a specific subgroup of patients who experienced absolutely no change. These were typically men in their late 50s and 60s who had a history of chronic stress or mild metabolic dysfunction. Their biological limitation was not just morning vasoconstriction. The specialized Leydig cells inside their anatomy, which are the biological engines responsible for manufacturing testosterone, had become deeply dormant. Suppressing their morning cortisol with honey was completely ineffective because their bodies were simply not producing enough baseline testosterone to take advantage of the relaxed blood vessels. The raw materials were missing. This profound clinical plateau forced me to investigate natural pharmacological compounds with documented mechanisms of action capable of directly stimulating the reproductive axis. I eventually identified a highly specific combination that I now fully integrate into my advanced patient protocols. The formulation relies on 2 primary biological interventions. The first is an active compound called forskolin. In clinical literature, Forskolin bypasses the central nervous system and directly activates an enzyme called adenylate cyclase inside the Leydig cells. This physically intensifies the biological signal, forcing these dormant cells to resume the endogenous production of testosterone. The second critical component is a highly standardized extract of fenugreek. As older men produce testosterone, a destructive enzyme called aromatase frequently intercepts it and converts it directly into estrogen. Fenugreek acts as a potent natural aromatase inhibitor. It actively blocks this conversion process, ensuring that the new testosterone your Leydig cells are producing remains free, active, and available to defend your vascular tissue against cortisol. In men between the ages of 61 and 69 who had previously hit a complete wall with dietary changes, I have consistently observed a measurable, sustained return of morning firmness and physical vitality within 5 to 6 weeks of introducing this specific biochemical support. It is critical to understand that this is targeted nutritional scaffolding with a heavily documented biological mechanism, not a synthetic drug. Because purity is my absolute primary concern, I only recommend formulations that have undergone rigorous independent laboratory testing to verify the exact concentration of active ingredients and the complete absence of heavy metals or synthetic analogs. I have placed the direct link to the specific formulation I use in my clinical practice in the pinned comment below this video. You can access it there, review the clinical literature, and evaluate the precise composition of the ingredients for yourself at your own pace. Understanding this dynamic between cortisol and your reproductive hormones is about far more than just restoring your morning performance. It is about recognizing the systemic impact of unmanaged stress on your aging body. When the cortisol awakening response dominates your mornings, unchecked for years, it does not just constrict the blood vessels in your pelvis. It degrades your muscle mass, accelerates the accumulation of visceral fat around your organs, causes profound cognitive fog, and heavily ages your cardiovascular system. The loss of a spontaneous morning erection is simply the first, most visible symptom of a systemic endocrine collapse. Men who correct this imbalance do not merely recover their intimacy. They frequently report a dramatic return of mental clarity and sustained physical endurance, simply because they have finally removed the chemical burden of chronic stress from their vascular network. We have covered a significant amount of complex physiological information today. We have established exactly how the cortisol awakening response physically constricts your blood vessels, and why the loss of morning vitality is a hormonal issue, not just a mechanical one. We discussed the specific biochemical matrix of raw, unpasteurized honey, how it utilizes insulin to blunt morning stress hormones, and the precise combination of forskolin and fenugreek required to reactivate dormant Leydig cells and protect your free testosterone. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you typically wake up feeling immediately alert and physically energized? Or does it take you several hours to clear the morning brain fog and feel like yourself? Your endocrine system possesses a remarkable degree of biological plasticity, which is the inherent capacity of your Leydig cells to heal, adapt, and resume hormone synthesis when provided with the correct stimuli. However, that window of responsiveness steadily narrows as prolonged oxidative stress forces the tissue into a state of permanent dormancy. Intervening while your cellular engines are still capable of responding is the absolute key to reversing the mechanical decline. The targeted nutritional support protocol I discussed is specifically designed to amplify these exact physiological adaptations, providing the precise biochemical environment your body needs when dietary habits alone are no longer sufficient to overcome years of metabolic stress. The link is located in the pinned comment below for you to examine the science directly. Take action to restore your hormonal baseline today, before the mechanical dormancy of your tissue becomes irreversible.